In the long and bloody history of war, there are moments that shock the conscience of humanity. Moments that reveal not only the brutality of conflict but also the fragility of morality when war strips away restraint. One such moment was the My Lai Massacre during the Vietnam War. A single village, a single day, and a single act of unthinkable violence became one of the darkest chapters in modern military history. To understand why it happened, and why it still matters today, we must first step back and look at the war that gave birth to such an atrocity. The Vietnam War was unlike any conflict the United States had fought before. It was not a traditional war between armies meeting on clear battlefields. It was a guerrilla war, a conflict of ambushes, hidden enemies, and shifting loyalties. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. had committed hundreds of thousands of troops to support the government of South Vietnam against the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh and backed by the Soviet Union and China. The Viet Cong, communist insurgents in the South, did not fight like conventional forces. They blended into villages, dressed like farmers, and launched hit-and-run attacks before disappearing into the jungles. To many American soldiers, every rice paddy could hide an ambush, every peasant might be the enemy. This uncertainty created paranoia, anger, and fear. It was in this environment that the seeds of My Lai were planted. By 1967, U.S. military strategy was driven by a concept called the body count. Success was not measured by territory gained, but by the number of enemy soldiers killed. Units were pressured to produce high enemy casualty figures. Promotions, awards, and reputations often depended on it. But how could soldiers tell who was Viet Cong and who was just a farmer? The answer, tragically, was often indiscriminate violence. Villages suspected of harboring guerrillas were destroyed. Civilians were sometimes killed under the assumption that they might be the enemy. In early 1968, the war took a dramatic turn with the Tet Offensive. On the Vietnamese New Year, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched a massive surprise attack across South Vietnam. Though militarily repelled, the offensive shook American confidence. U.S. forces, embarrassed and demoralized, were under pressure to show results. Anger and frustration filtered down the chain of command. It was in this context that Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, was ordered into the rural Quang Ngai province. Their mission, search and destroy the village of Sun Mai, particularly the hamlets of My Lai, believed to be a stronghold of Viet Cong fighters. The soldiers had been told to expect resistance, booby traps, and hidden enemies. They were briefed that anyone remaining in the village that morning was likely an enemy sympathizer. On the morning of March 16, 1968, around 100 soldiers of Charlie Company entered My Lai. Instead of armed fighters, they found women, children, and elderly villagers preparing breakfast. What happened next would horrify the world. The soldiers began rounding up villagers. Despite finding no weapons or signs of Viet Cong, the killings began. Men, women, children, even infants, were shot at close range. Women were raped before being killed. Homes were set on fire. Animals were slaughtered. Some soldiers herded villagers into ditches and opened fire with machine guns, killing dozens at a time. Those who tried to flee were hunted down. The violence lasted hours. By the time it was over, as many as 500 unarmed civilians were dead. Entire families were wiped out. My Lai was left a smoldering ruin, its fields and homes littered with bodies. Not all soldiers participated. Some were horrified and tried to stop the massacre. Most famously, a helicopter pilot named Hugh Thompson and his crew, flying overhead, saw the carnage unfolding. Risking their lives, they landed between fleeing villagers and American troops, threatening to fire on their own side if the killing did not stop. Thompson and his crew rescued survivors and reported the atrocity to their superiors. But in the chaos of war, the massacre was initially covered up. Military reports claimed that over 100 Viet Cong had been killed in action. The civilian deaths were written off as collateral damage. Officers falsified records, and those who tried to speak out were silenced. For more than a year, the truth remained hidden. But rumors persisted, and eventually, the story began to leak. A soldier named Ronald Ridenhour, who had heard disturbing accounts from fellow soldiers, wrote letters to members of Congress, demanding an investigation. Finally, in November 1969, the American public learned the shocking truth. Journalist Seymour Hersh broke the story in the press, and photographs taken by Army photographer Ronald, gruesome images of piles of dead villagers, appeared in newspapers around the world. The reaction was explosive. For many Americans, the massacre shattered any remaining illusions about the war. It was no longer a distant struggle against communism, it was an atrocity committed by American hands. Anti-war protests, already strong, grew louder and more widespread. Students marched, clergy condemned the violence, and ordinary citizens questioned what their country was doing in Vietnam. Internationally, the My Lai massacre became a symbol of American brutality. Enemies of the U.S. used it as propaganda, while allies expressed outrage. The incident severely damaged America's moral authority and credibility. The U.S. military, forced to respond, launched an investigation. Several officers and soldiers were charged, but only one man was ultimately convicted, Lieutenant William Calley, the platoon leader at My Lai. He was found guilty of murdering 22 villagers and sentenced to life in prison. However, after public pressure and political intervention, his sentence was reduced. Calley served only 3.5 years under house arrest before being released. The light punishment further fueled controversy. Many Americans were divided. Some saw Calley as a scapegoat, arguing that responsibility should have reached higher up the chain of command. Others saw his leniency as proof that the military did not take accountability seriously. Survivors of My Lai and critics around the world viewed it as an injustice, a failure to truly reckon with the scale of the atrocity. In Vietnam, the massacre left scars that remain to this day. Survivors carried trauma for decades. Generations grew up haunted by the memory of what happened. My Lai became a place of mourning, but also a symbol of resilience. A memorial now stands there, reminding the world of the horrors of war and the importance of remembering those who suffered. The My Lai massacre was not just an isolated event, it was a window into the darker side of war itself. It revealed how fear, dehumanization, and the pressures of military culture can lead ordinary men to commit extraordinary crimes. It showed how policies that prioritize body counts and victories on paper can create an environment where human life is devalued. It also revealed the importance of truth-telling. If not for the courage of whistleblowers, journalists, and witnesses, My Lai might have remained hidden forever. It was a reminder that in times of war, truth is often the first casualty, and it takes extraordinary effort to bring it to light. For the United States, the massacre became a turning point in the Vietnam War. It deepened domestic opposition, fueled distrust of government officials, and contributed to the growing belief that the war was not just unwinnable but morally indefensible. It remains one of the most infamous war crimes in American history, taught in military academies and universities as a cautionary tale. Decades later, the My Lai massacre still resonates. Survivors and veterans have met in reconciliation efforts, seeking healing across the divide of history. Some soldiers who were present expressed remorse, while others defended their actions. For many, the tragedy serves as a reminder of the need for accountability, ethical training, and the protection of civilians in conflict zones. War always carries with it the potential for atrocity, but My Lai stands out because it was not the act of a few rogue individuals, it was the failure of a system. A failure of leadership, oversight, and humanity. And its legacy forces us to confront difficult questions. How do ordinary people become complicit in evil? How can nations prevent such crimes? And how do societies remember and learn from their darkest moments? The story of My Lai is not just about the Vietnam War. It is about the universal struggle to maintain morality in the face of violence. It is about the responsibility of soldiers and leaders to uphold human dignity, even in the most desperate circumstances. And it is about the need for all of us to remember, so that such tragedies are never repeated. On that day in March 1968, in a small village in Vietnam, hundreds of innocent lives were lost. Their names may never be known to the world, but their memory endures. My Lai is more than history, it is a warning. A warning of what can happen when war strips away humanity, and a reminder of why justice, truth, and remembrance are essential.